you ever stop to reflect on decisions you've made in life and zero in on the ones that changed your world? Or do you wish you had made some life-changing decisions, perhaps by the seat of your pants, but feel now that it's too late? Well, this video is about 2 decisions I've made that involve sailing and RVing that just might inspire you to take a few foolish risks and see what might happen. My story begins when I turned 50, when I decided that I was going to sail around the world. I didn't have a clue about sailing. I didn't own a boat, but I had a dream of sailing to the South Pacific and beyond. My kids were grown, and I was on my own now. What was stopping me? Well, money, or lack thereof, to start with. No local or offshore sailing experience, but more importantly, no boat. But I had a job. I was CEO of a local health authority, kind of a glamorized hospital administrator, and I had a means to pay for some kind of sailboat, no other commitments, and that dream of sailing to the South Pacific that constantly occupied my mind. Well, within months of my 50th year, I owned a sailboat, which immediately became my live-aboard home, and the push was on to learn everything I could about how it worked and how it could be my ride on the open oceans. I was obsessed with sailing away. For months, people in the seaside town where I worked would see me out in the channel with only the head sail up. That was because I didn't know how to raise the mainsail, and I wasn't confident I could handle 2 sails at once. The head sail alone was easy. It was on a furling line that I could pull in and out easily. I could handle that. I earned the name of Billy No Main. And after 7 years and a job change that meant a change of location to Victoria on Vancouver Island, the capital of British Columbia, Canada, I was ready to go. At the age of 57, I was 1 year older than my dad when he died at 56. It was important that I go to chase this dream. With no realistic plan for how I was going to live beyond this point, or how I would survive in retirement years, I quit my job in July, and on August 9th, I pushed away from the dock in Victoria Harbor. My boat was a 36-foot sloop named Contigo. The name translates to with you in Spanish. Well, I was without, but I sure wasn't going to change the name. By now it was much more than my home. She and I had bonded tightly over the past 7 years as I learned every inch of her being, how far she could be pushed. I trusted her to take care of me because, man, I was not the best sailor. Technically, I was inept, but intuitively I seemed to get by, and I was no longer Billy No Main. Contigo had been re-rigged with every convenience and safety feature for solo sailing. I decided it would be wise to have crew with me for the first part of the journey south. The Washington and Oregon coasts can be wild if you're caught in nasty weather. I'm told some of the worst conditions in the world at times, and we'd be about 75 miles offshore for the first part. I needed a couple of sailors who could act to overcome my ineptness. In the end, I passed on a fellow sailor who lived in the same marina, a dentist who was going blind, and who had diabetes. My other choice, a retired physician, an internist, persuaded me that we couldn't deal with a dentist with diabetes. I guess the blindness was okay. The physician wasn't much better. He had a weak knee that required a knee brace. But he was a dear friend with an adventure spirit, tough as nails. I trusted him completely, although his appearance was a bit sketchy. My second crew member was another friend with multiple sclerosis, but his ability to cook and his offshore sailing experience won us over. So the ship of misfits was established, and off we sailed. We all became schooled in the use of the new radar, the wind vane steering, and new navigation system as we rounded the northwest section of Washington State and headed south. We were really committed now. After sending our MS patient ashore in Coos Bay, Oregon, so he could return to work in BC, the GIMP physician and I carried on to San Francisco. After arriving under the Golden Gate Bridge, it was just magical there. And within minutes of arriving at the dock in San Francisco Bay, my dear friend was on his way back to BC. He couldn't get away quick enough. I was really, truly on my own now. I spent the next 2 months meandering my way along the California coastline, visiting places I had heard so much about as a child, working my way to San Diego before the next leg of the journey down Baja, Mexico. On one occasion, I spent 5 days anchored in San Simeon Bay, where the infamous Hearst Castle was perched up on the hillside. Another sailboat was anchored nearby with 2 innocent kids not yet in their teens. Each day they would row by Contigo, asking me if I had any garbage that they could take ashore for me. And each day I gratefully gave them little white bags that I had tied to the lifelines, ready for their arrival. And then weeks later, while tied up in a marina in Santa Barbara, I realized the same sailboat with the lovely young family was also there, and after several days of spending time together, we became really good friends. It was on one of those pleasant evenings aboard their boat that I confessed that their kids had been unknowingly transporting my personal bags of poop ashore each day, for which I was really grateful. I didn't want to pump my tank into the pristine bay, and their kids were the ideal solution. It was that evening when their mother, in shock and with dismay, gave me my second nickname, not Billy No Man this time, but Billy Crapbagger. Shortly afterwards, as I made my way to San Diego, I was hailed off Santa Catalina Island by a U.S. Coast Guard cutter, and I was told to drop my sails. They circled me with guns in hand, and they boarded Contigo. They asked about discharging waste overboard, to assure them that I only opened the toilet valve when at least 3 miles offshore, and that I really didn't like to use the holding tank very much. I told them the story of Billy Crapbagger. That did the trick. They left shortly afterwards, satisfied that I didn't have any drugs from Canada and that I could not have made up the story of Billy Crapbagger. It was a pleasant encounter, not an international incident at all. I pressed on to San Diego alone, and once there, I was joined by 3 friends from BC as crew for the 750-mile run down the Baja. It's quite a journey. And apart from taking on water from an unknown place in the boat late at night, and having to place a mayday call that became difficult to later cancel and became a comedy of errors that actually resulted in the Mexican Navy searching for us for 3 days, and we didn't even know that. But apart from all that, it was a pleasant, exciting journey down the Baja. Actually, quite magical. Once we arrived safely in Cabo San Lucas, on the southern tip of the Baja, I was alone again. I hated the glitz and glitter of Cabo, the expensive boat slips and the constant party atmosphere. It wasn't a place to stay very long. I needed to pull Contigo from the water to examine where the water was entering the hull. It was my biggest worry. But Cabo was far too expensive to do this, so I headed into the Sea of Cortez, a little bit north to a seaside place called La Paz, a much quieter and peaceful place. Once my problem was fixed, and after spending 6 weeks in La Paz trying to avoid La Pazitis, which is it's a widely accepted ailment that causes you to remain in La Paz, possibly forever, I'm told, because once there, cruisers hated to leave, and it really grabs you. But then I had to decide which way to now go. Further down the Mexican coast to Puerto Vallarta, and west across the Pacific Ocean in early spring, probably around March, would take me to the South Pacific. But that was an approximate 30-day open ocean crossing, and I wasn't ready yet, mentally or physically. Financially. Physically too. I needed to return home to Canada to replenish my cruising kitty. The South Pacific and beyond needed to be an additional phase of this journey. I knew that. But I'd be back. So I spent the next month sailing deeper into the Sea of Cortez, eventually landing at San Carlos on the Mexican mainland. It's a noted refuge for storing boats while you're in transit, away from typical hurricanes. And here I could leave Contigo in storage while I returned home to make some money for my continued trip to the South Pacific and hopefully beyond. I'd return as soon as I could. Once I was back in my home province of British Columbia, I quickly realized that I needed a home while I worked replenishing my cruising kitty. My home for the previous 8 years, now remember, had been Contigo as I prepared her for the world's oceans. but nothing permanent. I only needed something clean and comfortable and mobile so I could move around the province doing healthcare consulting. So without any money to speak of, but a consulting job on the immediate horizon, I walked into an RV dealership and I walked out with a brand new Ford 350 diesel crew cab. It was a 4x4 as well, and a brand new 32-foot Arctic Fox fifth wheel right out of the showroom. What a fool! I was in heaven and in debt. But that was a minor concern. I had a cruising dream to pursue, and this truck and RV were just means to an end. And I could use them to return to Mexico and Contigo to prepare the boat for the next part of my adventure. It was a win-win, right? And then while enjoying my early days with the truck and fifth wheel, living on the British Columbia coast and doing my consulting work, I met a lovely person named Michaela. And together, we returned regularly to Contigo to work on her and enjoy Mexico life. Within 3 years, the truck and the fifth wheel were gone. Contigo was in the best condition she had ever been. Michaela and I were married, and we bought a beautiful seaside home in San Carlos, Mexico, overlooking the majestic Sea of Cortez, and the very spot where I had landed with Contigo just 3 years before. It was pretty cool. And by this time, we both had become captivated with sailing the Sea of Cortez and the beauty and friendliness of San Carlos. It just couldn't be beat. And San Carlos is a small seaside town where we developed a lot of friends. Somehow, sailing to the South Pacific and beyond didn't seem so important anymore. We had found our dreams with each other and with Contigo on the Sea of Cortez. What could be better? We weren't rich with money, but coming together and taking the risk of buying a home in Mexico allowed us to enjoy a beautiful oceanside life and sailing adventures that were almost better than dreams. And we spent the next 12 years enjoying every moment. And then flash forward to the present years, our Mexican home is gone, replaced by our 1997 Beaver motorhome named Maudie and our tow car Lola, and along with our 2 Mexican kitties, Boogie and Squeaky, who we actually found wandering our neighborhood in Mexico. We've taken up permanent residency on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, which is our home base for exploring Canada, the USA, and Mexico. And yes, we still have Contigo, who is resting comfortably in Mexico in a storage yard, waiting for another adventure with someone other than us. And for us, now, we're pretty content to continue updating Maudie and taking him, and hopefully you, to places throughout the USA and Canada. There is so much to see and explore to share with you. You know, I often wonder what would have happened had I not dreamt of sailing to the South Pacific. That actually resulted in buying a boat and Contigo playing a huge part of my life, and later Michaela's life with me. And that resulted in living and sailing in Mexico, exploring the Sea of Cortez, and how that experience later resulted in a decision to purchase a motorhome and shift our adventures to the highways and beyond. You know, the South Pacific may not be in reach anymore, but we know Maudie is going to take us places that are just as magical. And the funny part is, we don't have to worry about dragging anchor anymore in a storm. Thanks for watching. See you next week.